Hi, I'm Will Bruin, and I was just recognized as a Seattle Sounders legend. Now I get to do voice reads for the Sounder at Heart podcast network.
This episode of Nos Audietes is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Audietes since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
A save by Fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Ray Diaz through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nico Ladero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is good.
It's gone! They've scored! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
We want to win. It's Seattle Sounders, bro.
Porter says cheated.
You know, what was the thought process in terms of who you decided to use and who you didn't?
Ever since Sounder Hart wrote a commentary that we didn't take Open Cup seriously.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Nos Audietes, sponsored by Full Pull Wines and our lovely subscribers. This is our post-Leagues Cup group stage catch-up, and we're recording on Monday, August 5th. I'm Aaron Campo, filling in for Jeremiah, who's on the road this week, and joining me today is our good friend, Mark Kastner. Mark, thanks for joining me today. How are you?
You know, I was better before I watched the Sounders last night, but overall, pretty good. Yeah,
that's kind of an evergreen thing, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Especially when we're talking about the Leagues Cup, which, I'm sure our listeners have figured out I'm not a big fan of. I think it's fair to say you're not a huge fan either, but it's the Sounders. We've got a job to do. So let's do it. The Leagues Cup group stage has come and gone. It was a bit of a mixed bag for the Sounders. They looked pretty good in a 2-0 win against Minnesota United in the first leg, but they did leave it quite late and were helped quite a bit by a 65th minute straight red card to Hassani Dotson for a pretty shocking tackle that injured Raul Ruiz Diaz, who was frankly, I think, pretty lucky that the injury wasn't worse than it appears to have been. But still, the Sounders looked good throughout, despite not getting their first goal until the 87th minute and tacking on another right before the final whistle. Minnesota were able to hang around as long as they did, in large part thanks to an heroic performance from goalkeeper Dan St. Clair. As far as I'm aware, we don't have XG for Leagues Cup games, but the Sounders managed 20 shots. They were very much on the front foot all night long. It was a really encouraging performance, I thought, following what was a pretty major letdown against LAFC in the last MLS match before the break. The Necaxa game, less encouraging, I think it's fair to say. The Sounders came out of the gate flying. Obed Vargas scored a fantastically taken goal in the 8th minute. I think one of the best pieces of play I've seen from Obed ever, maybe. Just a great finish. Looked like the Sounders had doubled their lead less than 10 minutes later when Pedro de la Vega scored a completely outrageous curling shot from about 20 yards out. I had to watch this 3 or 4 times to figure out what had happened. I just assumed it had taken a deflection of some kind. But unfortunately, it doesn't matter because it was overturned by the kind of ticky-tack bullshit offside call that makes everyone hate VAR. And that was the end of anything good or positive from the game. Necaxa leveled in the 25th minute. Pedro de la Vega was pulled due to a groin injury right after the half-hour mark. We don't know how severe it is right now, hoping it's just precautionary, but, tough to say. Necaxa would take the lead right before halftime, and they were completely in control, I think, from then on. Brian Schmetzer, to his credit, I thought made some really aggressive substitutions, but it didn't really change that much. The Sounders were just bereft of ideas. Necaxa was really, really well organized, and they would go on to win the group by adding a third at the end of right at the start of stoppage time. Ultimately, it didn't really matter, right? The Sounders did enough against Minnesota United to assure that they'd move on to the knockouts. They're still going to host in the next round. I think the lineup choices to some degree reflected that. This was definitely a rotated squad. The Danny Leyva, Obed Vargas central midfield pairing was not one we've seen a lot of. for reasons probably I think are a little more understandable now. Reed Baker-Whiting had a rough game defensively, I think. So Necaxa is a team that loves to counterattack. They found the opportunities to do that. They scored. Doesn't change anything really for the next round other than the opponent. It wasn't a game the Sounders needed to win. And, even if you're invested in the Leagues Cup, I think it's probably difficult to be too bothered by this result. It's just one of those things, right? You get countered at home. It's a bummer. You move on. But I think the thing that does concern me is some of the negative patterns that we saw earlier in the season, long passages of just toothless possession, fragility in the base of bad fortune. Those are things that I think we saw in the LAFC game to some extent, and really in this Necaxa game. And so I just wanted to take your temperature, Mark, on how you're feeling after these two games.
Yeah, I think I never really want to get into the conversation of like discrediting what people feel and why they feel the way that they feel. I would say if you want to be really upset right now about this team, if you feel like they're uninspiring or boring, they gave you everything in this last game to like stoke that fire. Yeah. But also if you're somebody who wants to kind of cling on to anything for this season, and depending on how you felt after the LAFC game, it was kind of like, well, we're gonna have to wait and see until the next time they play LAFC if the season's gonna be anything, which obviously is the semifinal of the Open Cup. They gave you some hope in the Minnesota game where they didn't play great, but they definitely did enough to win the game, and it just happened to be that those two goals came super late.
Right.
So it's like there's optimism for the people that want to be optimistic. There's a bunch of stuff to be pessimistic about if you want to be pessimistic. I am at a stage where like I can't personally be invested in the Leagues Cup because it's just like it is like I feel so disconnected from reality when this thing is happening that I'm just like, I don't blame anybody for anything that happens into it because it doesn't feel real to me.
Right.
But I will say, though, I think the one thing that I can hold on to and feel like pretty bummed out about is, and it might be unfair to make this connection, but other people have been making it, and it's definitely a valid concern people have. Earlier this week, the Sounders raised the ticket prices on season ticket holders because of some weird tax thing that's happening all of a sudden. And then the next home game that they play, this stuff happens. It's just kind of like there's probably it's not just this one game, obviously. There, like you said, there are themes that happen in this game that we've discussed countless times. You and Jeremiah have discussed countless times throughout the season. And it's just a bummer, it's just a bummer to keep talking about the same, like, ooh, this team just doesn't like, to your point, Smetzer did make aggressive subs, but how many times can he go to that well where he makes one or two subs at halftime? And it's just like, you can't keep being the same. Like, you can't keep going to the same tricks. You got to actually get better, and they might not be actually getting better. It's tough to tell. So
yeah, this to me feels like a team that was really underachieving earlier in the season that gave a lot of people concerns that they were worse than they probably are. But I think it's fair to say at this point that, and this is not obviously based on just the Necaxa game or even just the LAFC game, just it's the pattern of results. I do not think this team was ever a real favorite to win the West as they were sort of pegged by a lot of folks. I was optimistic about this team. I think that the upside isn't there with the players they have. And there's no ace in the sleeve on the bench, right? There's no magic bullet that's going to help you win games. I thought what I guess if you want to be encouraged by anything, it was very obvious, and maybe this can be encouraging if you want it to be. It can be discouraging if you want it to be. It's totally a perception thing. I was encouraged by the fact that Brian Schmetzer was clearly very, very frustrated by how slow the team was playing. If you compare the first 15 minutes of the game where things were moving very quickly, the ball's going side to side quickly, the Sounders being progressive. When they turn the ball over, they're pressing, they're winning the ball back. That is when the Sounders play well, is when they're playing like that. After the overturned goal, and especially I think after Necaxa's first goal, it was the opposite of that. It's that slow, plodding, methodical style that can be really effective if you have the guys to have it. Unfortunately, the Sounders haven't had the kind of prime Nico Ladero player that helps that style work since 2021, right? And 2022 partially, I guess. And it's awful to watch when they get stuck in that rut. And I think it is encouraging that it's clear that it's not the way Brian Schmetzer wants the team to be playing. And they've taken positive steps to not play that way anymore, I think, in a lot of games. But it's discouraging that tendency is still there when they're kind of out of ideas. And that's, I think, it is truly terrible to watch. And unfortunately, it happens most frequently at home, because if the defense gets settled, it's what the Sounders are going to end up doing. And that's what happened in this game. As soon as the game was level, Necaxa packed it in. And breaking down a well-organized defense is difficult for any team anywhere in the world to do. I don't care who they are. So I don't think the Sounders are unique in that it's difficult to do that, to break those teams down successfully. But I think the way that they tend to go about trying to do it is pretty miserable to watch. And it's I don't blame, the crowd seemed really restless to me. Like, they seemed as annoyed and upset as I've heard them before. I don't blame them, man. If that's how I spent my Sunday night, it was bad enough spending it on the couch watching it. I can't imagine how much of a bummer that would be to do it on actually going to the game, traveling to the game if you had to. And then, like you said, like the ticket price thing, I don't want to talk too much about it, because every 5 minutes I hear something new. And so I don't want to say something that ends up not being true about it. Right. But right now it appears to be that a lot of what the Sounders have been telling people is more or less pretty accurate, maybe. But the way they went about communicating it was, I think, horrific. And the sticker shock is still the sticker shock. And, this is the same product that the Sounders have been putting out there for a long time. And these guys used to be better than they are now. I mean, that's the reality of it. And I don't blame people for being sick of watching it. We'll get into this a little bit more a little later in the show. But something has got to give at some point in time. I don't know what that is. I really don't. I'm not calling for anybody to be fired or anything like that. It's just, we can't keep doing this year after year.
Unfortunately, it sounds like it's Pedro de la Vega's groin that's giving. So
yeah, that's a hey, you know what? You're a pro, Mark, because that's a great segue. Because that's one of the things I wanted to talk about is Pedro de la Vega coming off injured with a groin injury. Like I said, we don't know how severe. I think the fact that he jogged off, he didn't have ice on it for that long, apparently, that is encouraging. I think that they are just treating him, they're handling him with kid gloves, which I think is the right thing to do. But it's not good to see.
Yeah, and I think like Spencer said something very interesting and kind of De La Vega's ramp up kind of the last time he was injured, or I guess that would have been pretty recently, in like June or July, where he was just kind of like doing a media availability and then randomly said, if he gets hurt again, we're going to shut him down for the season. Right. And that was just like, kind of caught everybody off guard. Like, how hurt is this guy? And I do think that you got to kind of wonder, like, if he's not going to be able to put it together at this point in this season, I don't want to have the conversation of like, is he a waste of money? Is he a bust? he's just clearly a very good player, but he might just need some time off.
Yeah.
And when you hurt two hamstrings and then you're injuring your groin, you kind of probably just need like to rest. And
right. Yeah.
And, I think if you're looking at the season and if it seems like the front office is already kind of writing it off because they're not willing to spend the money to bring in an impact signing this window. They say they're going to try to target somebody, but it's not kind of the big move a lot of people want to see, i.e., shipping out Raul and probably bringing in another multi-million-dollar signing. That's not going to happen. This team is just going to be as good as this team is. Right. And they're probably just this good. This is it. They're a team that's going to finish between, let's say, 4th and 7th in the Western Conference. They could they have a real decent chance at winning the U.S. Open Cup. And they might be good enough to do something in the playoffs, but it would take a genuine miracle for them to win MLS Cup.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Sounders are actually uniquely pretty well set up for the playoffs, or better than I think their seeding would indicate. But I would not feel great about this team's chances of winning an MLS Cup. They have some like mid-90s Florida Marlins vibes where they are just built for the playoffs. They have a great defense. They keep the scoring environment low. They're really tough to beat on the road, blah, 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 all that stuff. But ultimately, they're going to have to beat an LAFC or a Columbus Crew, like one of the elite teams. And it's just hard to see them doing that.
Yeah. And of course, like something like that could happen. And they are, like, I agree with you. They're kind of perfectly made for a knockout tournament, which is why I guess I'm a little bit bummed Leagues Cup has gone the way that it's gone, because it's like, hey, this is a tournament. I don't think I would feel any differently about this season if they won Leagues Cup. They very well could still do that. I personally wouldn't care, but that's literally a trophy that they would get and they would be able to put into a trophy cabinet, and it's a story that the team could tell.
Yeah.
Right.
Champions League too. You get Champions League qualification.
That's true. Even though on the call they said you get a Club World Cup berth, but I don't think that that's true. Is it? Yeah. Well, the Sounders already have one of those anyway, so it doesn't matter. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be middle of August before we still don't know the Sounders' best team this season.
Yeah,
mostly because the one guy that they've spent money on in the last 3 years got hurt.
Yeah,
and that's not his fault. It's also not the training staff's fault. It's not the coaching staff's fault. It is very, very, very poor roster planning at an organizational level. It's not just one person's fault. Craig Weibel, everybody's upset about what he's doing or not doing. And it's there's so clearly a problem with communication and planning within the organization at this point.
Yeah.
That how can you just say oh, the GM's not doing his job?
Yeah, I'm with you on that 100%. I'm not going to go to bat for Craig Weibel and say that he's a great GM who's being held back. I don't know. And that's my position and has been. He has, I think the fact that he was highly recommended by Garth Lagerwey speaks to his abilities and he's clearly a smart guy. I think that Pedro de la Vega is the kind of signing I want the Sounders making. Most of his moves that he has had the opportunity to make, I don't really have huge problems with. The Danny Basovsky signing, right, I think is a great example of unrealistic expectations, because a lot of people are I think really upset with that signing. They think he's been a huge bust. He's a forward he's a veteran forward with a decent MLS track record, making under $400,000. This is the kind of player you get for that, right? I don't have any problems with that signing. The Hebert signing, I think, was the result wasn't good, but I have no problem with the process. He had a established MLS track record of being a good player, and he got to Seattle and forgot how to finish. can't really blame Craig Weibel for that. The only thing I really think I would hold against them is giving the extension to Xavi, but also I don't really know what they would have done with that money in the offseason either, right? So yeah, it's maybe he is a bad GM, but I just don't think we have any way of really knowing because he's not being given the ability to make the kind of big moves. Getting ahead of ourselves because we will talk about this in more depth later, but yeah, I'm totally with you on that. I think this team's ceiling is pretty well established, as is the floor. They're not a bad team. They're not that good of a team either. And I think that they have specific weaknesses that Necaxa exposed. Speaking of specific weaknesses, I would like to talk about Reed Baker-Whiting and his performance at left back for the first half of this game, and just generally this season. I like Reed Baker-Whiting a lot. He clearly has an upside. He clearly has some bordering on elite skills. But his defense has been a pretty big problem. You and I do not necessarily agree on Nuhu, but I think that we both agree we would rather have a left back like Reed Baker-Whiting. But you have to play a little bit of defense, and that's just been a big problem for Reed so far. Do you have concerns on his ability to develop in this position longer term? Do you think he needs to move up a line? Do you think that playing on the right would be better suited to his style of play and his footedness, I guess? Just some general thoughts on that.
Yeah. Excuse me. I do think it's like probably his weakest position of the like 4 or 5 he could play. And it's a little annoying that he's constantly put in this position when there are other things you could do with this current roster that could put him and other players into positions to succeed instead of just like hoping he figures it out. I agree. This wasn't a great game. He's had other poor performances at left back, the Kansas City game. I thought actually he was actually pretty good when he played right back against LAFC.
Yeah.
Even though that game, there was nothing really wasn't a whole lot of good that came from that game. But, and then I think he's looked the best this season when he's playing as a winger with a more defensive fullback behind him.
Yeah.
As kind of a left or right sided wing back, basically. So yeah, I mean, like it's a pathway into the team, right? And
right.
There are countless examples of players like this in the history of soccer that have played out of position, have kind of come in, stepped into a position because that's where the available game time is, and they just made the best of it, right?
Yep.
I think he is making the best of it. I just don't think the best is very good.
Right. Yeah.
So it's like, he like it, and it should be said, like, it's not like the Sounders got better defensively when he subbed off the field. Like, yeah,
it's true.
Like Nuhu was fine. I'm not going to turn this, like, I'm not going to really talk about it, but it's like, look at the goal they conceded, the third goal they conceded. And there's just like they're not a bad defensive team, but they just make like really stupid defensive mistakes. Like I would say the second and third goal shouldn't happen for a good defensive team. The first goal, you just kind of can be like, well, whatever. Okay. Yeah. But yeah. And it's just kind of like a young player like Reed needs a platform to be able to perform on.
Yeah.
And I feel like the platform given to him is like very rickety and like dangerous.
Yeah.
And the reason why you want Reed Baker-Whiting to be playing left back is because of his like fearlessness, but he's so young and so raw that he's going to be taking risks that he shouldn't an older player, a more kind of experienced player wouldn't make. And you just got to you cop for that, right? For a young kid. But because of the way that the structure is, it's just like he takes those risks, and it's it's just a problem that happens over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, I think and I actually think I understand why the team wants him to be a left back, right? If you can have a young attack-minded left back that has his skill set and he can stick at that position, that's a hugely valuable player, both to the team now and on the market, right? So I get wanting to see if he can figure that out. And I think this is the right kind of game for that, right? You've already advanced to the next round, more or less, unless you get totally boat raced. And you're doing some rotation. And I think, too, to be fair to Reed, his errors kind of stood out, but I thought that the midfield was a horror show all night, and he was put in some bad positions as well. I do think it is a little strange, like you said, that he's getting all this time at left back where he does seem to struggle, where we have an established starter that Brian clearly likes pretty well, who I think the new Reed Baker Whiting left side has looked really good when we've seen it. I think that they suit each other really well. Their strengths complement one another. Their weaknesses are sort of offset by the other strengths. So I'd love to see that left side, and I'd love to see Reed at the right back spot more frequently, because I think that the way the Sounders are set up to play, his skill set is more well suited to that side of the field. So yeah, but I do think maybe we have enough information now about him at left back to know that maybe that's not going to be his future. But I think he does have a very bright future. I'm still very high on Reed. So I also wanted to get your thoughts on Andrew Thomas. Obviously, we saw him a lot earlier in the year when Steph Fry was hurt. We've seen him in the Open Cup. But this is the first time we've seen him against top-level competition since pretty early in the season. And I think it's been kind of a mixed bag. I'm still very high on Andrew Thomas as well. But I was really hoping he would give us something to think about. Maybe not this year, but going into next year. And I don't know that he's done that. I don't know that he did that in these games, but wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think probably wants to do better on the first goal. Yeah, because he gets a hand on it, and it just kind of like bounces off of his wrist into the goal. I was both encouraged and discouraged by his actions on the second goal. Because that's a situation where my biggest criticism of Stephen Fry comes into play, where Fry just kind of like decides where he's going to stand and never moves.
Yeah.
Similar to his red card against DC that got rescinded. Like he just like picks a spot. He just stands there.
Yeah.
Whereas like Thomas on that, like actually came out off of his line and then was like, oh, this was a bad idea.
Yeah.
So like, I guess while I would like to see him do better on that goal, I guess I have to just kind of be like, well, that's the other side of the coin.
That's true. That's true.
And you just, for like the last basically 10 years, we haven't had a goalkeeper make that kind of mistake because Stephen Fry just doesn't do stuff like that.
Right.
Which I think we should all appreciate. Especially those of us who have at times maybe said it's time for Fry to graduate into maybe not the starting goalkeeper role. But yeah, I mean, I just don't think he played. I just don't think he played a very good game, unfortunately, and that's just kind of the life of a backup goalkeeper that you're hopeful ends up becoming the starter is at some point eventually.
Yeah.
It was not a good performance. I will say I thought his distribution was pretty good, which has been a weak spot.
Yep. Great call.
Like he was like, especially when the Sounders are down, he was like so quick to get the ball out and into transitional situations, which I think kind of caught the players off guard because they're just not used to that.
Yeah.
And they didn't really know what to do in those situations. But we kind of already talked about it was kind of a dud of a performance anyways. So
yeah, I think that to me, he is still very clearly the guy for the future, barring some kind of weird, unprecedented collapse. I love his game. I love his skill set. What I'm hoping for is next year he gets some more opportunities as a rotational player. I know coaches do not like to rotate goalkeepers outside of cup competitions, and I totally understand why, but I think giving him some midweek games in MLS, just getting him some more reps where, Stefan Fry's deals up after next year. I'm at this point totally comfortable with him going into next year as the starter, but I don't want the transition to be too rough. I want Andrew Thomas to get some more reps, especially in league play next year, and not all, front loaded or whatever due to injury. And so that's kind of what I'm hoping for. And if there's a benefit to staying in Leagues Cup, it's that he gets a few more games, I think.
Yeah, and who knows? We don't know what's going to happen in the Open Cup yet. I would hope that he is given the opportunity to play the semifinal and the final.
Yes,
if the Sounders advance that far, and who knows? Maybe some sort of heroics, or just general good play. It doesn't even have to be heroics happen there. So
yeah, it's going to be disappointing to me if he's not starting against LAFC. I think, and then hopefully, God willing, in the final, because I think if you're going to tell a guy, hey, you've got this cup.
Thank you for listening to the Sounder at Heart Podcast Network, which now includes Nos Arietes, Lobbing Scorchers, and the Cooler Guild. We've been independent since August of 2023, but need your support to make sure it continues. Although this podcast is free, it's only made possible by your continued support. Memberships start as low as $25 a year, which not only helps make podcasts like this one happen, but also gets you access to everything we produce. If you're able to support us at higher levels, starting at $75 a year, you gain access to a host of other perks, most notably entry into our members-only Discord, where the smartest, funniest, and most engaged commenters share their thoughts and ideas. To find out more, just visit sounderatheart.com and click the subscribe button in the top right corner. Thanks for listening.
They've got to have the whole thing. Like, they've got to have the opportunity to win or lose in. And I think, Ziggy was pretty good about that. I don't think he ever went back to the starter. If he had promised the backup, so hopefully Schmetz has a similar perspective. Anything else that you feel like we learned from these games?
Yeah, I feel like we can't have a midfield without either Christian Roldan or João Paulo starting.
Yeah.
I was like pretty excited about the possibilities of what this midfield partnership could have shown with Danny Leva and Obed Vargas. And in the 15 minutes when we thought the Sounders were going to score 5, they looked great. And then, I don't know if the Monstars stole their power or something during that VAR review that lasted an hour.
Yeah.
But they just there wasn't enough experience between the two of them to know who needs to step, who needs to drop back. There just wasn't chemistry there. And it really showed, unfortunately. And I think at least for the remainder of the year with, whatever happens, I think you got to figure out a way to either have João Paulo starting.
Yeah.
And then if that can't happen, Christian Roldan has to be there, just to kind of provide the important base.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think if that's the most reasonable and calmest thing I can say I learned.
Yeah.
So far.
I think that was my big takeaway too, is that, and maybe I'll go a step further and say that for me right now, I think the highest priority for the future, not necessarily the signing I would make tomorrow if I could, wave a magic wand and make a signing, but I think the thing they have to figure out before they figure out anything else is João Paulo's replacement. Because he's had some really good games this year. He's had some really bad games this year. I don't think I would feel comfortable going into the next season with him in that role. And I think that this team has to have a six, some kind of defensive midfielder. I would love for that eventually to be Josh Atencio. I think he has the tools. I do not think he's there yet. And I think it's going to take a purposeful transition for him to get there. And I think having, a guy that he can learn from a couple of years come in at either a TAM or DP level would be a good way to facilitate that. So I think that was my big takeaway.
Yeah, and to the Atencio point, I just don't see a midfield partnership of him and Obed Vargas like working together.
No, they're very similar players.
Yeah, and I think they're both very talented players, and they both have played their best when they've been partnered with João Paulo.
Yeah,
and they both played their worst when they played together.
Yeah.
There's some John Madden level analysis for you guys. But I think if we're going to be proactive about this roster, you got to start wondering, like, can they cash in any amount on Obed Vargas?
Yeah.
And then have a plan around, like, okay, João Paulo can be here for one more year as kind of a spot starter, and then we can bring in a partner for Josh Atencio.
Yeah.
But who knows if that is the case.
Yeah. Last night was really the gamut of the Obed Vargas experience. He had some great attacking play. Loved his goal. The kind of stuff I've really been wanting to see from him, and just some really horrendous giveaways. Maybe most glaringly that one towards the end of the game. He did get put in kind of a hospital ball situation there, so I don't want to be too harsh on him, but just a really bad decision I would say passing to the opposition in your own 18 is never good. So
it's not what you want.
Not what you want. But he's a kid, right? He's 18. It's going to happen sometimes.
He's 19 today.
Oh, that's right. Today's his birthday. So happy birthday, Obed. I think there's a world where Obed and Atencio are a great pairing if the Sounders make a move to playing without a 10, and then you put a just real destroyer type 6 behind them and let them, press like crazy. And I think that could look good, but I don't think that's where the Sounders are going with things, I would guess. So, and I do think Obed's probably, not going to be around too much past this season. So, Galaxy are up on Thursday. I don't have anything to say about that. We'll see. Galaxy are a good team. The Sounders have hung with them pretty well this season, although I think they've got 1 point from the 2 games they played, I believe. So we'll see. I would, if we're going to be in this thing, I guess I'd kind of like to stay in it, just so Andy Thomas can get some more reps. We can maybe do a little more roster, a little more experimentation with the lineups. But I'm also not going to be heartbroken if they get bounced. Any thoughts on the Galaxy, Mark?
I think they're really good. Yeah, unfortunately,
they're a good team. It's a bummer.
It really, they've spent a lot of money.
They have.
And not just on this current version of this roster, but let's say in the last 5 or 6 years, they've spent a lot of money on guys.
Yeah.
And it finally stuck.
Yeah.
They found 3 DPs that are legitimately great. So that's a bummer.
I'm weirdly, this sounds crazy to say, but I'm weirdly kind of encouraged by the Galaxy's resurgence, because the Galaxy had that period where they were a dominant force in MLS. The Sounders never reached quite the same heights in terms of MLS Cups and all that, but I think they reached a higher high in winning the Champions League, and they were kind of seen as the standard bearer the same way the Galaxy were. And then the Galaxy fell off the face of the earth for a while. And I think a lot of people predicted that they were going to become DC United, right? Like a team that used to be great, and now they have, competition, and and they're just going to be a middling team. And so the fact that they've managed to avoid that is in its own way kind of encouraging. It's also kind of a bummer because I hate the Galaxy and I don't want Western Conference opposition to be good. But it is proof that you can get back there, right? Unfortunately, you have to spend money to do that. So
yeah, that is a good point. When you spend close to $20 million on two guys,
right.
It turns out that you can get some pretty good quality there, which I don't know who needs to hear that information, but
I've actually been told reliably that transfer fees don't actually help you at all, and that it's not smart to do.
Well, yeah, I mean, hey, I don't know who out there thinks that, but I would say maybe some of your internal bias need to be reevaluated and modernized. Again, I don't know who thinks that, but if you are somebody that does think that, maybe consider doing some evaluation there.
Yeah. Another great segue, actually, because while we're here, we might as well talk about the transfer window. It's been open for over 2 weeks. Be closing in a little over a week. I'm guessing this episode will probably come out on Wednesday, so a week from today, if that is the case. If not, you know how to do math. You can figure out how many days it is. There was a lot of smoke and apparently at least a little bit of fire around Dinamo Zagreb wonder Dario Spikic. But the Sounders were reportedly unable to meet his salary demands. And I think that really illustrates how difficult it is for Craig Weibel to thread the needle on making an impact move in this window. There's a finite amount of cap space that the Sounders have to work with. Fitting that kind of player into that cap space, especially if they have a transfer fee associated, with the move, which they're probably going to. Free agents also require signing on fees and all that kind of stuff. So it's tricky. It's very tricky. It's not an insignificant amount of cap space, but it's also not a ton of cap space, right? There's a very narrow window that they've got. And the only plausible way that they can get more is either I was going to say by using a buyout, but that's not plausible. They're not going to do that. So the only plausible way is to move a player that has value, and that's going to offset some of the positives of adding a new guy. If let's say you trade Nathan and open up some cap space that way, maybe get some GAM back or something like that. Now your defensive depth is worse, right? So there are options to do that, and maybe that trade-off is worth it, but it's not as nice as just going out and signing a guy. We've talked a fair amount on the show, and of course, Jeremiah had a really great piece about this a few weeks back on the subject. Nothing has changed for me. The Sounders have been a much better team over the past few months. They're still, a slightly above average team. I think they have some real weaknesses, and things are just stale with the team. The core has been the core for quite a while, and I like the core of the team, but I need some new guys to keep things interesting. I think the fans do as well. The rest of the fans do as well. Attendance is getting bad. Like we talked about, the crowd last night was, I think, pretty vocally unhappy. The thought of not doing anything at least a little bit ambitious in this window is completely baffling to me. But at this point, that seems how things are headed. There's just not that much time left, and we haven't really heard anything rumor-wise since the Dario Spikic rumor was sort of put to bed. How are you feeling about it, Mark?
I felt so much dread when I saw Freddie Montero tweet a video of him playing on a vintage TV, and then an emoji that said soon, or back soon or something like that. I think signing nobody would be better than that. So that's how I feel. I don't know what that meant. I don't have the emotional intelligence to want to figure that out. But transfer windows are a funny thing, because fans talk about them as like a present reality. The players are currently added to the roster in these windows, but the actual reality is these things happen months ago, or they should be happening months ago. There should be plans in place. There should be your top, 5 targets or 3 targets, or you can contact agents and teams and stuff outside of transfer windows and figure out what a possibility is.
Yeah.
And the way that the Sounders are behaving right now is a very 2012 way of handling a transfer window, and it sucks.
Yeah.
They're going out and seeing who's available in this moment, and they're having salary conversations with players. And that is such a bad way. Excuse me. That is not a way I approve of.
Right.
And I understand that there are current constraints around this roster that the specifics of which neither you and I are privy to, because that information is not released to the public. However, I think to identify and name yourself as an organization 2 targets that you have failed to get without actually saying, like, here's the one we actually are getting.
Yeah.
Like Garth was a master at this, right? He would get a player in and be like, yeah, well, we tried A and B and we ended up on C, but C is like a really great player. And, they would go on and either be good or they wouldn't be good, whatever. But Garth had like a really great way of communicating those things. I was at the beginning of the summer, I felt like pretty optimistic that they would buy out Raul and do something.
Yeah.
I think I even said that was going to happen, and I was wrong. I thought they would come into the summer, especially with like how the spring went, with like a statement. And the statement they've made is basically like, the fans have unreal expectations, or unrealistic expectations to have a winning soccer team.
Yeah.
And it feels a lot like kind of getting like scolded as a spoiled child, which I think is really bad. And I'm not happy with anything that has happened so far. And I don't care if they sign somebody anymore, because I don't think the player that they're going to sign could realistically be good, because the free agents that are available now are theoretically free agents that no European team wanted, because European leagues are starting now, or they're well into their preseasons now.
Yeah.
A player that is available for sale from a European team right now is, again, not very good and not a meaningful addition to the squad. At least in like a holistic sense. And so just don't waste my time. I don't want to get to know somebody that's not really going to move the needle.
Yeah, it's unfortunate kind of that the window ends when it does, because there's always that period right at the end of the European window where teams get all their stuff in place and they say, okay, we've got all these guys that we want to ship out, right? And you can get some good players, you can get some good value for money during that portion, but the MLS window is closed, and so those options aren't there. And yeah, I think that if you want to be a team that is only going to pay transfer fees in very rare cases, and you want to build the bulkier roster signing free agents, that's great. You have to go sign the free agents, right? And also, when you're signing a free agent, unless you're signing a guy who sucks and nobody wants, the agent of that free agent knows for a fact that you would normally be paying a transfer fee. And so they're going to get a bigger signing on fee. The wages are going to be higher. So it's not like you're going out and signing a guy for exactly what their last contract was, right? Like you're paying agents fees, you're paying signing on fees, you're paying bonuses, you're paying a higher inflated wage. And you can still get good value for your money doing it that way. But this idea that paying transfer fees is this huge waste of money because you don't have to do it if you sign free agents, I think is a little silly.
It's a very dated way of evaluating this stuff.
Yeah. I think the days of when you're going to say to Mauro Rosales, hey, do you want to come train with us and we'll see if you stick, and then he ends up being your MVP, that doesn't happen anymore. That hasn't been the case in MLS for a while. LAFC struck gold with Kai Kamara, but they're also LAFC. He's getting great service. He's there as a placeholder, right? Like, it's just very rare that moves like that hit. And I mean, I'm very much on the team that transfer fees, the amount of transfer fees that you pay in transfer fee does not correlate to winning. I think I think that's impossible to ignore. You can spend transfer fees badly. You can spend a ton of money on transfer fees without it turning into results. But as Jeremiah has said a lot, I think you have to spend something. Like, you can't just go bargain bin hunting and expect to win. And yeah, it's, it sucks, man. I'm hoping that maybe the organizational thinking on this changes. I think coming to the realization that not wanting to use a buyout wasn't really a respect thing, which is kind of how I understood it for a while, that it was like, hey, we don't treat our guys like that, but I know we just don't want to do it. That was really kind of a turning point with how I felt about about the situation. And because even if I think we don't want to disrespect our club legends by doing that, even if I think maybe that's misguided in some ways, it's admirable. But if it's like, no, we just don't want to do it, we just don't want to pay him to go away, that's a different thing. So yeah, it's I'm hoping they reevaluate some of this stuff in the offseason.
Yeah, and they can reevaluate it now, so it can be.
Yeah, I hope they reevaluate some of this stuff in time for the offseason. You're right. That's a much better approach.
Yeah, and it's not like Raul would have felt disrespected because he would get to go somewhere that he could theoretically start. And
also, I don't think Raul needs a lot of help to feel disrespected.
No. And yeah, to that point, he already feels disrespected. Right. Whether that's right or wrong, I can't possibly be the judge on that. But like, all right. So I've been, for 2 years now, I've been this proponent of this idea that Garth did things with the roster to position the roster to win CONCACAF Champions League, and that there would be residual effects to that.
Yeah.
And I know everybody is exhausted of hearing that talking point. However, he did that with the plan to get the team out of that situation. And right before the offseason, where theoretically that plan would have started, he left.
Yeah.
So, and I doubt he left the blueprint behind, because that would be crazy.
Yeah.
Because you're going to a competitor in the same league. And I have a lot of sympathy for Craig Weibel in the sense that he came into like an escape room and he has to find his way out of it. And then I also am sympathetic to the fact that the conditions have probably changed clearly with the way that the ownership is talking about spending on the roster. But I don't care whose fault it is at this point. Like it's the same team for like 4 years.
Right.
And if you look at everybody else in MLS, everybody else, including San Jose, who is like historic, like very bad right now. This isn't a conversation for like transfers just for transfer's sake. It's like, you got to try to do something to try to do something,
Yeah.
And not doing something is a choice, and it is the worst choice in this situation.
Yeah, I would say that I don't necessarily blame anyone for the way this season has gone and for the signings they made and the decisions they made, because I do think there were a lot of reasons to think this team would be better than they are. The De La Vega injuries obviously have hurt things a lot. What I'm frustrated by is that the response to it has not been different, and that doesn't necessarily mean they have to blow everything up mid-season and go out and do something crazy. It's just the way they've been talking about things. Some of the rumblings we've heard about transfer budgets and things like that. I just don't understand how you can look at this and think, yeah, we'll be able to figure this out without some serious investment. And I don't think, like, there are a lot of things about the core of this team that I like, right? Like Jordan Morris, Christian Roldan, Jackson Reagan, all guys that are going to be useful to, good players for the next few years. Like, you can build a championship team around those guys within a window of a few years, but it can't just be those guys. It can't just be those guys in Rusnak. And like, you have to have a difference maker or two. And Because I really do think that that's what, like, this team is not that far away from being great. It's just they don't have that top end. I think if this team still has 2019 Raul Ruiz, they're probably in the hunt, right? But they don't have a guy that can take over games, and they don't seem willing to go get them at this stage. So,
and something that can happen when you're not constantly like adding to a team is players can get worse.
Yeah.
We've had conversations about Nuhu this season, Yamar, Alex Rodon, Christian Rodon, Jordan Morris, Raul Ruiz, Albert Rusnak, João Paulo, Leo Chu, Stefan Fry. Like, every man on this roster, there's been a conversation about, like, maybe they're not as good as they were. And that's why you need to constantly kind of be refreshing the locker room, basically, for lack of a better term, because a new player can come in a position and ignite. Like, for instance, if we had like a comparable a right back, right, or left back for that matter, that wasn't just a kid, like Alex Rodon could theoretically take on that challenge and be like, I need to get better to keep my starting job.
Yeah.
Pretty much every position on the field, exactly who would be starting if it was like a quote unquote MLS Cup final. And it's just kind of like, yeah, you probably have a conversation about every single one of those players. And they're maybe, let's say, 5 to 15, 20% worse than they were last season.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of like, well, there's nobody coming over their shoulder to like challenge them to get better. And then on the flip side, you're not giving any of these players new ideas or new players to work with. Like we had the conversation about Reed and Nuhu earlier. Like, there are different combinations of different players when you add players via transfers that unlock certain skill sets in players that you didn't know existed before.
Yeah.
And they're just continually I've grown very sympathetic to Brian Spetzer this season because, like, it's the same players, it's the same ideas, and he just has to like make it work.
Right.
And it is working, kind of.
Yeah. And I think he is trying to do different things. I think he is trying to set the team up differently and trying to encourage them to play in different ways. But, it's they've been together playing a certain way for so long that it's going to be tricky to do that. And I think, to your point, I don't think it's any accident that after Alex Roldan got hurt, Christian moved to right back and was playing really well there, that when Alex came back and he got a chance to start again, he has been a better player. I don't think it's any accident that Raul Ruiz coming in off the bench when he's pissed off about losing his starting job looks like a different player. I don't think it's any accident that when Jordan Morris gets the opportunity to move back to the 9 where he wanted to be, and he has something to prove, that he looks like a different player. Like, I do think that these guys need things to motivate them. And whether that's roster turnover, internal competition, whatever it is, I think you're right that they've got to have some more of that, and they're just not getting it right now.
Yeah, and this is the type of situation that like can kind of compound on itself. So like you go one window without doing anything, that sets a certain tone, and then 2 or 3 more windows after that, it's like it's a thing that can get exponentially worse. Like we just talked about the Galaxy, they experienced this too, although they never went like 2 or 3 transfer windows like the Sounders have, like this, where they just compounded the issue more and more and more. And that's my kind of worry, is that like this eventually, like they just kind of fade into this obscurity of like just being an okay team, like just kind of being like I don't even know what the example would be, like Houston or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that fade into mediocrity where you can, get hot one year and make a run and look like a good team, but generally you're just kind of there and you're not bad. That's so much worse than just being bad, because being bad either it encourages it forces you to put up or shut up as an owner, as a GM, as a coach, or whatever, right? To say, look, this team sucks and this isn't tenable. We can't keep doing this. Something has to change. Or to say, we're just going to be shitty and people can check out, you know? Now, obviously, nobody wants that, but still, at least you have a decision to make, right? Whereas when you're mediocre and occasionally good for long stretches of time, it's just like becomes part of the background. And yeah, it's the worst. It's the worst thing to be. Boring and you know,
you're the New York Red Bulls.
Yeah.
You may make the playoffs 16 years in a row or whatever, but
right.
What the last meaningful, memorable thing you did, the two most important players from that team are on MLS 360 now. It's like,
yeah,
what? And I feel like that's where the Sounders are headed, unless like some very significant recalculations happen with the way that they do things.
Yeah, that is a bummer of a note to end it on, but I think it's a good note to end it on. Thank you, Mark, for joining me. Sorry that this was kind of a bummer of an episode, but you know, we're used to it at this point. Want to thank our listeners, our subscribers, and of course, Full Pull Wines for their wonderful support. Jeremiah should be back next week. Hopefully we'll have something a little more fun to talk about. Maybe a signing, maybe a win over the Galaxy. Maybe not. We'll see. But thanks for listening as always. I'm Aaron Campo signing off for Mark and for Lickett, and we will catch you next time.
We love you. Let's win another one!